Dear class 10 children, welcome to view the video lesson on how do organisms reproduce, chapter 8 of your science NCERT textbook. This lesson deals with different types of reproduction, that is both asexual and sexual reproduction. But in this video lesson, I am going to make you understand about different types of asexual reproduction only. Hope you would like this lesson, and if you like it, please click on the like button and also subscribe for my channel. Dear students, before we discuss the mechanisms by which organisms reproduce, let's ask a basic question. Why do organisms reproduce? After all, reproduction is not necessary to maintain the life of an individual organism, unlike the essential life processes such as respiration, nutrition, or excretion. On the other hand, if an individual organism is going to create more individuals, a lot of its energy will be spent in the process. So why should an individual organism waste energy on a process it doesn't need to stay alive? Whatever the answer to this question, it is obvious that we notice organisms because they reproduce. It is the large numbers of organisms that belong to a single species that brings them to our notice, isn't it? So let's understand what is reproduction. Reproduction is another life process by which new individuals of the same species are produced by existing organisms. Reproduction is important for the continuance of life on the earth, addition of new species, replacement of dead organisms, and also transfer of variations from one generation to another. Do organisms create exact copies of themselves? It's an important question to answer. Organisms look similar because their body designs are similar. If body designs are similar, that means the blueprints of these designs should be similar. Reproduction at its most basic level involves making copies of the blueprints of body design. Chromosomes in the nucleus of a cell contain information for inheritance of characters from parents to next generation in the form of DNA. We all know this when we learned about the cell in class 9. A basic event in reproduction is the creation of a DNA copy. DNA copying is accompanied by a cell division, giving rise to new cells. DNA copies generated will be similar but may not be identical to the original. This leads to variation. Let's understand about types of reproduction. There are two types of reproduction: asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. So in the case of asexual reproduction, a single parent is involved, whereas in the case of sexual reproduction, two parents are involved. In the case of asexual reproduction, gametes are not formed, whereas in the case of sexual reproduction, gametes are formed. No fertilization takes place when it comes to asexual reproduction, whereas fertilization and zygote formation is observed in the case of sexual reproduction. There is only mitotic division when it comes to asexual reproduction, whereas in sexual reproduction, meiosis occurs at the time of gamete formation. Daughter organisms are genetically identical to the parent in the case of asexual reproduction, whereas the new individuals produced after cell division exhibit variation in the case of sexual reproduction. Now let's see what are the different types of asexual reproduction. The first one is fission, and typical example is amoeba. Second one is fragmentation. Typical example is Pyrogyra. Third one is regeneration. Example planaria. Fourth one is budding. Example hydra. Fifth one is vegetative propagation. We can take an example as rose plant. And the next one is spore formation. We can take the example as rhizopus. Let's understand about asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is the simplest type of reproduction found in the unicellular organisms, and the first type is fission. Now, what is fission? It is defined as the splitting of a unicellular organism into two or more daughter cells. It is the most common and simplest method of asexual reproduction in unicellular organisms like protozoa and bacteria. Now, what are the two types of fission? Binary fission and multiple fission. Binary fission example amoeba, paramecium, euglena and leishmania. Multiple fission example is monocystis and plasmodium, which causes malaria. So what is binary fission? In this method, what happens? The parent organisms divides into two identical daughter organisms with definite orientation. At first, the nucleus mitotically divides into two, followed by the division of the cytoplasm. And finally, the splitting of the parent into two daughter cells. Some unicellular organisms show more organization of their bodies, like leishmania, which has got a whip-like structure. And this shows a definite orientation during the cell division. What about multiple fission? How is it different from binary fission? In this, parent organisms divides into many identical daughter organisms. The nucleus of the cell splits repeatedly to form many smaller nuclei called daughter nuclei, surrounded by a little bit of cytoplasm and thin membrane around them. In this way, many new cells, daughter cells, are formed from a single parent cell. Now let's understand about fragmentation. Fragmentation is a type of asexual reproduction in which an organism simply breaks into individual pieces at maturity. These individual small pieces then grow to form a new organism. Example is Pyrogyra, which is a filamentous algae, which is a multicellular organism with very simple organization. Now, this Pyrogyra undergoes fragmentation on maturity, and this results in many filaments, and each filament can grow into a new organism. The next one is regeneration. Many organisms like hydra and planaria, you can see the picture, can regenerate into a complete individual from its single segment. That is, a fully differentiated organisms can give rise to a new individual organisms from any of its body part. This growth of whole new organism from just a broken or cut part is termed as regeneration. Another interesting type of asexual reproduction is budding. What is budding? In budding, a daughter organism is formed from a small projection known as bud, which develops as an outgrowth due to repeated cell division on the parent body. It later detaches to grow into a new independent individual. Hydra, a multicellular organism, uses regenerative cells for reproduction in the process of budding. Another type of asexual reproduction is vegetative propagation, which is found only in plants. It is a kind of reproduction when new plants are produced from the parts of the parent plants like stems, leaves, roots, and even buds without the help of any reproductive organ. The two types of vegetative propagation are natural and artificial vegetative propagation. Natural vegetative propagation by roots, example is sweet potato. By stem, example is ginger. By leaves, example is bryophyllum, because as bryophyllum has got small buds in the notches along the margin of the leaves, which when they fall into the soil, on the soil, which will grow into new plants. And artificial vegetative propagation, there are three different types shown here. The first one is layering, typical example is jasmine. The next one is cutting, bougainvillea, rose, and even sugarcane. And the next one is grafting. Different types of grapes, mangoes, and citrus fruits can be grown by grafting. Now, what are the advantages of vegetative propagation? The plants which are produced by vegetative propagation, the fruits and flowers grow faster than the one which are grown by the seeds. Earlier they come, and now this vegetative propagation plants have got genetically similar to their parent plants, so they help in maintaining useful characters of the parent plant. Also, this is a quicker method of growing, propagating plants. And in some plants like banana, jasmine, and rose, which have lost the ability to produce seeds, vegetative propagation helps them to grow and propagate. Let's understand about tissue culture. In tissue culture, new plants are grown by removing tissue from the growing tip of a plant. Now, these cells or tissues are then placed in an artificial medium where they divide rapidly to form a small group of cells called callus. Now, this is then transferred to another medium, which is hormones for growth and differentiation. The plantlets formed are placed in the soil to grow to mature plants. Now, many plants can be grown from one parent in disease-free environment, and this is used mostly for ornamental plants in the case of tissue culture. And many plants can be grown very quickly with desirable qualities in the case of tissue culture. Yet another type of asexual reproduction is spore formation. Now, what is spore formation? Even in many simple multicellular organisms, specific reproductive parts can be identified. The thread-like structures that develop on a bread kept in dark, moist place for a few days are the hyphae of the bread mold, rhizopus. They are not reproductive parts. On the other hand, the tiny blob on a stick structures are involved in reproduction. These blobs are known as sporangia, which contains spores. And these spores are protected inside a thick wall, and when a favorable condition like moist and dark a place comes, the spores are thrown out and they develop into the hyphae of the rhizopus. As the final exam, dear children, is nearing, these are some of the probable questions which would come from this part of the unit. So please go through these questions and answer can be referred from the video lesson. Thank you. Hope you like this lesson. Have a nice day.